Welcome to this edition of Computer Insider. Over all the years that I've been producing this show, there's been one horrible reality that continues to this very day. Companies simply don't pay enough respect to the internet and the tremendous opportunities that it delivers. We launched this series in 1986, and at that time, the internet was a figment of someone's imagination, and online communications were done by dial-up modems. At that time, because correspondence was done by snail mail, press releases generally originated in the States and were mailed to the Canadian offices, who Canadianized them by replacing the U.S. president's name with his or her Canadian counterpart, switched the U.S. city to the Canadian city, translated it all into French, and then mailed out the finished product to Canadian journalists. This whole process took 2 to 3 weeks. Of course, the American head office was not focused on what was happening in the Great White North, and released their news at the same time the initial release was being sent to the Canadian office, meaning that generally the Canadian president was facing the press weeks before the Canadian end had finished to localize the release. So what we used to do, as to avoid embarrassing the Canadian management, was to fax them the American release before the press conferences, so they would have all the same information that we had and could answer our questions. Now let's skip forward about 25 years and look at what happened when a major Canadian telco launched a new product to break the near monopoly position that cable companies had in this country. They launched the product before their online end was ready, and that opened a Pandora's box of interface problems which the company in question never actually admitted ever existed. The worst issue that I ran into was that the commercial password had 7 characters and the consumer end had 4. Escalated support for consumers who had unusual problems meant that you couldn't get a 7-digit password into those 4 spaces. It took months to figure that one out, correct the problem, and let consumers who had unusual issues use the web page. Now, let's have a look at a situation today. The major drugstores in this country are in the midst of a significant consolidation, and at the same time are launching new online consumer programs that will help consumers refill prescription and retrieve marketing information. And by the way, multitasking is not the long suit for most of these companies. Having always been a little bit adventuresome and not afraid of overwhelming challenges, I stupidly registered for one such program, fully confident that I would, within the hour, be fully registered and interfacing from my smartphone. Well, the registration went fairly smoothly till I reached the part where you pick the outlet you want to use. That's where disaster struck. Fully confident that the site was built and tested by professionals, and having stood in a rather vulnerable drugstore not so long before I got to the online version, I was confident that I would ace the form and, well, be able to move forward with ease. So I typed in the name of the town where the store was located, and surprise, surprise, there was no store there. And the system transferred me to a different outlet some 20 miles away. Not in this lifetime. There was another field to enter the store's phone number, so taking no chances, I entered both. Well, double whammy. It's one or the other, and as it turned out, neither were recognized. On the page, there was a big, bold box saying that the company was dedicated to customer service. So I decided to report the issue using the company's online form to report the issue. And they did respond, suggesting I go to the physical store and register there. Actually, that's where my story began, in the store, where I was told that it was a new system, and no one in the store had any idea how to use the web interface. So I updated the PR person at head office of this information and asked them to complete my file by adding the ID for the local outlet. Again, I received a reply from PR. This time they proudly announced that they had forwarded my messages to the web people, reminded me to always include my case number in any correspondence, and wished me all the best. It's been 3 days since my adventure in paradise started. I logged on to see if anything had happened and found out that I am fully registered to receive all marketing material a chain can email out. The local store remains disenfranchised for the electronic interface of the corporation, and I can't refill anything online. Problems like this are always going to come up, and my recommendation is to always take the company in question to task. If they want to incorporate an electronic interface for web-savvy consumers, then make sure it's running properly. Problems do happen, and when they do, take them seriously by establishing some sort of consumer-inclusive support system so the client feels that someone actually cares. As a consumer, you can never, ever ignore the problem. Stand up and scream out loud, then one day their systems will work. Reporting for Computer Insider, I'm Bob Pritchard.